Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Lily Nichols, RD, is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out her first appearance on episode 590 of Boundless Body Radio. Lily Nichols is a registered dietitian and nutritionist, certified diabetes educator, researcher, and author with a passion for evidence-based prenatal nutrition. Drawing from the current scientific literature and the wisdom of traditional cultures, her work is known for being research-focused, thorough, and sensible. Her work has not only helped tens of thousands of women manage their gestational diabetes, most without the need for blood sugaring lowering medication, but also has influenced nutritional policies internationally. Her first best-selling book, Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, an online course of the same name, presents a revolutionary nutrient-dense, lower-carb approach for managing gestational diabetes. Lily's second book, Real Food for Pregnancy, is an evidence-based look at the gap between the conventional prenatal nutrition guidelines and what's optimal for mother and baby. With over 930 citations, this is the most comprehensive text on prenatal nutrition to date. Lily also co-authored her latest book, Real Food for Fertility, which is still an Amazon bestseller. You can find Lily on her social media pages and on her website at www.lilynicholsrdn.com. Lily Nichols, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you for having me back.
It's an honor to host you. I loved our conversation that we had before. It's already been 2 years, if you can believe it or not, that your latest book has come out. And yeah, just looking it up yesterday, it's still a #1 Amazon bestseller. So congratulations. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you.
How long did it take you to write that book? I know you co-authored this last one. How long did it take you to come up with all the ideas, lay everything out, and get everything written?
Well, Lisa and I had been thinking about writing this book for a while. We were actually like book writing buddies when she was writing her first book, The Fifth Vital Sign, and I was writing my second book, Real Food for Pregnancy. So we kind of had developed a pretty similar style of how we like write and research and write and research. But yeah, we'd been dreaming about this for a while, but from start to finish, we're looking at least 3 years. It was really quite a time-consuming process. And if you've looked through the book, it's a pretty long book, and we have over I kind of laugh when I hear, yeah, Real Food for Pregnancy has over 900 citations. This has well over 2,300 citations. So it's just like a beast of a book. Yeah, it was a long process, much longer. It took much longer to write than my other books, for sure.
That's kind of why I wanted to ask you the question, because it is such a big book. It's about 6 inches away from my head right now, and I just checked it. It's over 500 pages. So it is quite thick and very, very informative. You guys did a wonderful job doing it. I'm just curious to know, like, from the feedback and stories that you've gotten, are there any like really inspirational stories of somebody that, found this information and really was helped by it?
Yeah, we actually, I put together a blog article covering some of people's like top pieces of feedback. And we were really surprised that the success stories started coming in so soon after the book was published, knowing that, fertility really is a reflection of your overall health. So sometimes it takes a bit of time for the body to respond and for your hormones to respond. Like, I didn't think we would get any groundbreaking feedback until at least 6 months with it on the market. But it was like month one, hey, I like my long-standing primary and hypothalamic amenorrhea, meaning a woman who had never gotten her cycle before, like I got my cycle for the first time. I was like, I don't know how that's possible because you've only had like a month to incorporate the information. Like, wow. So we've had some crazy ones. We've had plenty of success stories on hypothalamic amenorrhea. So that's when you like don't have a cycle at all. We've had a lot of success stories with PCOS. So normalizing ovulation, normalizing the cycle, helping with insulin resistance and weight loss. We've had some really crazy ones with pretty long-standing infertility. We've had some women who reported, they've been trying to conceive for over 10 years and been through, multiple rounds of failed IVF. And again, within like a couple of months of incorporating the advice in there, like suddenly this unexplained infertility has resolved itself. I mean, really some truly miraculous stories. So I do have a blog article. I think it's called something like Fertility Success Stories if you want to read through some of the specifics, but it's been really really cool and humbling to hear how much of an impact it's made.
That's incredible. It's so cool to have, the practical information and go through all the science and the citations and everything. But when the rubber meets the road on the ground, and you start to hear those stories. That's where it really makes such an impact. So I absolutely love that. So thank you for sharing. I was kind of going through your website recently, which is you do a great job on your website, kind of presenting information. The blog is there, which is really good. And I found something that I thought was really interesting and could provide a really cool framework for our discussion today. I know you've done tons of different podcasts. I don't think you've ever covered exactly this. I'll be a little disappointed if you've already done this before. But I thought this would be fun to not only get to know you a little bit better, but also get a lot of like really cool practical information and maybe tie in your story to where you are today and how you think things and see things today. So for us to go through this, we'll get through as many of these as we can. But this is called on your website 10 Fun Facts and Why I'm Not Your Typical Dietitian. So again, I
Ah.
thought this might be an interesting thing to kind of go through and again, tie in your own personal story, how you think about things, how your thinking has evolved maybe. And we'll just go 1 through 10. We'll get through as many as we can in an hour. But let's start with the first one. I have the skills to count calories and track macros, but I make the informed choice to opt for mindful eating instead. I love the topic. It's kind of a hot topic these days, mindful eating or intuitive eating. And I think I don't know how to say this. I think most people get the idea that if they're eating mindfully or eating intuitively, they might be. I know if I was eating intuitively, I would intuitively eat a bunch of ice cream and pie or something. You know what I mean? So, how have you evolved your thinking around tracking things like calories and macros? And what do you mean when you say mindful eating?
All right. Yeah. And it's a good question because there's some context and nuance here. I put out a post, I think it was on my Instagram at some point that said something to the effect of you don't have to track your macros. And I tried to clarify in the caption that I didn't mean it's wrong to ever track your macros or nobody should ever track your macros. I mean, I help teach my clinicians in the Institute for Prenatal Nutrition precisely how to track all these things and run a full nutrient analysis on a client's diet history. Like there's a time and a place for tracking. And I've certainly done that, before. My thing is I think there's some like general nutritional common sense that can coexist with the framework of mindful eating. In that I know for myself from some self experimentation, I tend to feel best eating a more protein forward diet. Fewer carbohydrates, but not none. I don't really do well doing full keto. I've experimented with that as well, right? So somewhere that's like protein forward, the least processed foods possible, especially when I'm cooking myself and it's not like a restaurant. You can't really control the variables in a restaurant, but like a whole foods protein forward diet, I do great on. And when I eat in that way, it helps so much with blood sugar stability, and I've seen this from experimenting with the CGM in the past, that often things like these crazy cravings that you have for processed foods or whatever, those actually go away over time. It's not that I can never indulge, but I don't have as much of a need to when I'm starting from like a well-nourished, blood sugar balanced place. So I'm not a person who has like a food scale and measures everything out to make sure I'm hitting exactly a certain amount. Maybe occasionally I'll want to do a check-in. Hey, how much protein am I eating in a day and track something for a short period of time. But it's just to inform, you know, how to feel my best versus using counting and numbers to just obsessively take control over your whole life. And I see a lot of people get like to this extreme level of macro tracking. Well, if it fits your macros, or hey, maybe you're counting your calories and you're like, I have an extra 150 calories left. Okay, I guess I get a treat tonight. Like, how do we really know if your body truly needs exactly the same amount of calories every single day? Like, my belief, and especially if you're an active person, like it's in flux based on your activity levels or all sorts of other complex metabolic factors. So I find that like leaning into how my body feels and leaning into hunger and fullness cues, and still of course incorporating nutritional common sense of like eating as much, whole foods as possible, whole foods as possible, and as few processed and ultra processed foods. I'm able to feel pretty good, maintain my weight, keep my energy levels up without having to count anything.
Yeah.
So that's what I personally do. That doesn't mean that there's not a time and a place for tracking. There's certainly people, especially when they're working with a nutritionist or dietitian or coach, like there may be a time and a place where you do actually want to track as a check-in. Like a lot of people way underestimate or overestimate amounts of different things they're eating. And so sometimes it's helpful to have that kind of feedback of portion sizes and whatnot. But as a long-term strategy, the goal really should be learning sort of like patterns in which you can eat that give you flexibility so you don't have to be so obsessive about things.
Yeah, I love that. I spent most of my career working on a metabolic cart and showing people what their metabolic rates were. And even that, being fairly accurate, is based on so many different assumptions. You're talking about all the different metabolic processes that are going on. And then you think about also on the other end, what you're tracking. Like, are you really trusting MyFitnessPal or whatever is going to know exactly that your apple is the same apple that you put in this tracker? Like, it's unknowable. It's an unknowable problem on both ends. And my next question to you was going to be, when is it justified for somebody to track? And you just gave us a few examples there. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I totally agree. It's not my go-to, but for somebody who's really unaware or thinks they're getting, 120 grams of protein when really they may only be getting like 50 grams of plant-based protein or something like that. I
Absolutely.
think tracking can really, really help. So I appreciate that. Okay, number 2, fun facts. Whenever possible, I prioritize quality and sustainability in all aspects of my food. For example, grass-fed, pasture-raised meat, dairy, and eggs, wild-caught seafood, and organically grown and locally sourced produce. Why is that so important to you?
Well, it kind of ties back into what you're talking about with the accuracy of, tracking your foods. Like there's different nutrient density in foods based on how they're grown and raised, right? You feed, when cows eat grass, they have more omega-3 and more vitamin E and more vitamin A than when they're eating, corn and soy based feed, right? So the nutrient density of our foods is reflective of how it's grown and raised. If you grow things with, a good layer of compost, I'm a gardener too, so I grow as much as I can. Certainly not the majority of what I eat by any means, but some. And if you amend your soil with really good compost and manure, like you get better yields, you get better tasting food. I mean, you compare what you get from your garden or a local farmer's market to just like run of the mill grocery store produce, and it tastes different. It just tastes better. So even from like a foodie perspective, I mean, I got into food because I love cooking. Like I love good food first and foremost. Like I like when things taste good. So if you're just going by flavor alone, you get better flavor. And that's tricky. It's funny. I actually have not had somebody do this as a podcast
Oh, good. Okay.
thing, and some of these some of these points it may be a little bit like older, may have been a little bit more idealistic. I move around a lot, so I'm not always in a place where I can actually follow through with like all the produce being organic and all the meat being grass-fed and all the things just based on regionally where I'm at and what's accessible in the area. But in an ideal world, I certainly eat that way, not only because I believe it's more nutritious, but it also tastes better. Like I don't really like eating fresh tomatoes in the winter because they don't even taste like a tomato. Like
Terrible.
it's not worth eating. So in the winter, it's going to be, canned tomatoes because the fresh ones are just awful. They're picked unripe and ripened in, a climate controlled truck or whatever. They just taste like nothing. So flavor wise, that's a really big motivator to me with food quality.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you brought up the seasonality. I literally just 10 minutes before starting this conversation, I was walking my dog in my neighborhood and passing a garden plot where people can rent out during the summer times and grow things. And it's so sad because here in the Salt Lake Valley, we've already had a hard freeze and there's tomatoes on the ground and they're going bad. Tomatoes from a garden, like you said, are amazing. It's a revelation in taste. And you go to a store and think you're buying the same thing and it tastes like absolute cardboard. It's so
Yeah.
gross. so then that's what you're left with is like, okay, I can buy canned. They're not going to taste the same. I'm not going to get the same nutrition, or I can buy from the store and they're going to taste terrible. That kind of brings that seasonality out just a little bit. So yeah, I really appreciate this. And I'm glad this list is actually a little bit dated. I was kind of hoping it was so you could update us on different things you're thinking. So this is great. Did that on purpose. Let's move on to number 3. I did not go through my conventional training with rose-colored glasses, excuse me. I did not and still do not view nutrition policy as gospel. We talked quite a bit about this last time we had you on, where your journey through nutrition is just so unique because you learned about, Weston A. Price and, traditional ways of eating before you undertook, school to get your registered dietitian done. If I understand that timeline correctly, how difficult was it for you to go through the traditional training and see that what was being taught is not necessarily what you understood to be true?
Mm. Yeah, and that is accurate. I had come across ancestral eating stuff before going to college. I had a mentor at the time who she was a health professional, like physical therapist, also a chiropractor, did a ton of nutrition stuff, though. Was definitely one of those more, at the time they called it like complementary and alternative medicine. I guess nowadays you'd call her integrative health practitioner. But I had a mentor at the time who really encouraged me to just see my education through because it will be helpful at the end of the day to have a science background, but also have some letters behind your name, some credibility, get some experience in the conventional healthcare scene, and then you can kind of hit the ground running and take it in whatever direction you want. And that was good advice because I had considered many times, like, do I even want to continue with this? But, at the end of the day, and this is something I think you can apply to just about any place you find in your life where you're like, I don't know that I'm loving this. Like in any job you don't think that you're loving, like, how could I use this to my greatest benefit? So with my undergrad degree, I realized I really liked reading research and how cool as a college student, you get access to literally everything. And if your library doesn't have it, you can do interlibrary loan and get access to all these research papers. So, you know, having grown up and been exposed to ancestral eating practices, but also having people in my family and family friends who were into health in different ways, and some quite extreme, vegetarians and fruitarians and like all the stuff. You get a chance when you're in an educational setting to like fact check things. So I actually found out, I was like, well, I'm going to use this time to read up and see if I can verify any of Weston Price's findings. Sure, some people might, question his methods or think that it's dated or whatever, but let me look into, do we have any research on vitamin K2? Let me look into the research on retinol. Let me look into the research on, all these different, how phytates affect our mineral absorption and whether sprouting, soaking, and fermenting your grains makes any sense. Like it gave me a chance to explore that. So really anybody who's in it, like you don't have to do the RD. There's many like wonderfully trained nutritionists who have a nutrition degree and have taken different directions, like a CNS or some other certification. But for me, in the end, it was worthwhile to just see it through. I pushed the boundaries in some ways. I didn't always get the best grades because, maybe my professor doesn't agree with my assessment on my special project on Splenda. But there's also a time for you to just smile and nod and understand how these different like pieces fit within the larger system of education and things that are subsidized in different ways and the way that our healthcare system is, dysfunctional, and just smile and nod and bide your time and make it through. I certainly had to memorize things that I didn't agree with in order to pass my RD exam and my certified diabetes educator exam, because you just need to like see it through. And then in real life with a patient, you can actually give them the correct information. So, yeah.
That's awesome. No, that's great. I think that the credibility you got by going through with the program gave you the credibility to then write your books, which is going to hit so much harder for coming from a registered dietitian than it would from anyone else. I remember one of the nutrition certifications I had to go through to be a nutrition coach. They asked for a few essays, and it was already after I'd learned about low carbohydrate and ketogenic nutrition. I remember just writing these essays being like just a little bit snarky and putting like little digs in and like, yeah, we're reversing type 2 diabetes and like stuff that wasn't covered in the course. And luckily I passed before they got too angry. But yeah, sometimes you just have to smile and nod and get through it.
Yeah.
So I love that. Okay, number 4, I'm not afraid of fat, even butter or lard. In fact, animal fats are a staple in my diet, sourced from healthy animals, according to fun fact number 2. I don't trim the fat off meat, skim my bone broth, throw out the yolks, or toss delicious crispy chicken skin. Excuse me. This not only keeps my food delicious, but ensures I'm eating and absorbing essential nutrients. Is that still something you believe in, including lots of fat in your diet that's coming from good whole animal sources?
Yep, that has not changed. I guess the one caveat is sometimes if I make bone broth and it's like ridiculously fatty, or if it's like, I don't know, I don't always save the fat. If it's like a chicken broth, they're kind of like pretty high omega-6. I might toss that, but I usually do save the tallow that comes to the top of like a beef bone broth or something, and we'll use that in cooking in other ways. I still to this day never buy fat-free dairy products. It's always full fat. Never throw out the yolks. I still shudder when I see people making their, egg white omelets because they just want to up the protein for as few calories as possible. Yeah, fat is still, a large portion of the diet. And I think people get a bit confused about this. And this comes down to one of those places where sometimes tracking is useful. And part of why the practitioners I train, I do have them do a nutrient analysis because people have these ideas of what their macro breakdown is. But if you actually start to if you actually write down what you eat and run it through a nutrient analysis, it's really hard to comply with like a less than 30% fat, diet. That's like miserable, tasteless. You're taking the fat out of everything. Everything is low fat. You're using minimal amounts of fat for your cooking or whatever. So I don't, mainline sticks of butter or anything. I don't have a personal medical need to be on a fully ketogenic diet, but I'm definitely not taking the fat out of anything. The fat that's there is consumed, and I do cook with fat enough to, have things not stick to the pan and make things taste good. But I'm also not drowning things in like a ridiculous quantity of butter either. It's like enough to taste good from a culinary perspective.
I think that's probably the best way to approach it. We talked about tracking and macros and that kind of thing earlier, and I've always had the hardest time giving kind of general recommendations around fat. If somebody was looking for a number to be able to hit, obviously we can titrate up or down based on what somebody's goals are. But it is very difficult. When I can look at carbohydrates and say, okay, keep these like reasonably low as you can tolerate depending on your goals. Protein, obviously, we both agree we want the protein to be very high. Within that, there is kind of some movement as far as fat goes and whether people are adding a lot more fat to their diet or not. It can get a little bit tricky. So I do like the recommendation of just have the whole food the way that it is and the way that it came to you. You don't necessarily need to drown everything in oil or eat that stick of butter. You can add some of that to it if you want, but you don't need to like go out of your way to avoid the fat, and you also don't need to go out of the way to add a whole bunch more fat to the diet usually.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, even though I don't count calories, I mean, fat is a highly concentrated source of calories and, it's very satiating, which is great. But you can have people adding so much fat. I think some people went a little overboard from the keto era, but like they had the carb creep going on, but also eating tons of fat. And that combination is going to be problematic. Like if you are just way over exceeding your caloric needs, like yeah, you'll gain weight and you'll have some insulin resistance creeping in. So there's some common sense that has to come into play. And again, that's why I'm like, don't take the fat out of all the things, like eat it where it is naturally occurring and cook with a little fat, but you don't have to add a ton. I think my recommendations maybe have shifted a bit over the years as you kind of hear feedback from people and see how people's eating has shifted. You know, when I was first writing, people were still so fearful of fat, and some of that has faded away. That people got like maybe in some ways overly fearful of carbs, and so sometimes our messaging needs to be adjusted a little bit. But ultimately, that's also kind of the challenge when you're writing to the masses versus working one-on-one with somebody. When you're working one-on-one, you can identify the like little tweaks and areas. When you're writing to the masses, that's where things get tricky. And especially for so many women having restricted fat for their entire lives, we run into issues. But on the flip side, you get people going, you know, full, you know, maybe Weston Price style eating, and they're putting like a, you know, quarter-inch layer of butter on multiple pieces of sourdough bread over the course of a day. And it's like, well, maybe we don't need quite that much, you know?
Yeah. Common sense, like you said. And speaking of common sense, I hope everybody who's watching or listening would already know the answer to this question, but just to hear it from you, what are the fats that people should avoid?
The ultra processed seed oils, or as we used to call them, vegetable oils. So soy, canola, corn, cottonseed. There's probably more on the list, but generally it's the seed oils I don't recommend you consume like a huge amount of. I am not perfect, so if we go to a restaurant, there's probably seed oils in there, which probably explains why usually my digestion doesn't feel quite as good. You know, I don't feel quite as good when we eat out a lot. But I'm not perfect by any means, but I don't I try to keep them out of the house. Certainly there's no bottles of canola oil in the pantry or anything, and I try to keep the processed foods to a minimum so we're not getting a lot of seed oils. You really want to be
Perfect.
focused on, you know, the animal fats are great: butter, ghee, tallow, lard, the coconut oil or even palm oil. I know people get all up in arms about whether it's sustainably sourced or not. That's another topic. Avocado oil sometimes, olive oil. It really, you know, some of these oils are easily adulterated, which is why I kind of like give it with a caveat. But I do use like an olive oil for salads, and occasionally use an avocado oil if I need like a really neutral flavor that doesn't taste like olives in something. So yeah, those are the ones that I generally am eating.
Again, just doing the best you can with what you have, I think is
Yep.
totally fair game. Awesome. Okay, great. Number five. I've been a guest on over 200 podcasts and radio shows, and you can see which ones on my press page. I'm sure that number is much, much, much higher now. So this is just a quick, fun one, but I just have to ask, besides appearing here at Boundless Body Radio for now the second time, do you have any favorites that really stand out?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so it's well over 200 now, might be over 400. I don't know. I did 90 in 2024 alone, right after Real Food for Fertility came out. So um, we do have some favorites highlighted on the press page. We've highlighted top 30. I guess it's a bit arbitrary because it's hard to like limit it to such a small list, but I really enjoyed my interviews on Max Lugavere's podcast. He's a great interviewer. There have been some really good birth ones that I've been on over the years. Trying to think of the names. They all kind of blur together at this point. I was on Will Cole's podcast this past year, which was good. Um, yeah, go check the top 30. I apologize. I wish my brain was better at remembering them all, but I was like looking back on the press page and I was like, whoa, maybe some of these I maybe shouldn't list anymore. Like Rob Wolf had me on way back when in like 2015. He was super nice to have me on. I talked about gestational diabetes, and that was like one of the top interviews on his Paleo Solutions podcast back in the day. But like that podcast doesn't even exist anymore, right? So it's funny when you start looking like, okay, how much do we link or not link? It starts to get a little bit crazy over time.
Totally. Well, I don't expect you to remember all of those. The birth ones would be interesting because I assume you would be talking to kind of a more like diet naive kind of crowd that are maybe learning about like lower carbohydrate nutrition for pregnancy and gestational diabetes for the first time. Had that been your experience?
It depends. A lot of the birth ones will have me on to talk about gestational diabetes because, depending on how that's managed or what the regulations are in the area that somebody is practicing, uh, it can risk you out of your birth location or birth provider of your choice. So, quite a few midwifery kind of podcasts or doula podcasts will have me on to talk about gestational diabetes for that reason. I can think of one like No Birth Queens was a pretty popular one, but there's been like a whole bunch of midwives and doulas that have had me on, and I would say it kind of ranges like the level of nutrition education that they have. It's certainly a bit of a different crowd than talking to somebody like yourself or somebody in like the metabolic health or low carb keto sphere. Like they might be a bit more naive on the pregnancy specific aspects of things. So yeah, it's always interesting to kind of like the types of questions and the way they're framed will definitely be different based on the background of who the podcaster is.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we've got that page tagged up in the introduction, so anybody can go back and show notes and be able to pull those up if they're interested. So I just found that kind of fun. This is another kind of fun one. When I'm not number 6, when I'm not reading research, writing, or speaking on prenatal nutrition, I'm probably wrangling my 2 kids. You still do have 2 kids, right?
I do still have 2 kids.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Hiking or foraging for wild food. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see what I mean. So obviously, the question is, of your 2 kids, which one is your favorite and why?
I love both my kids. Yeah, I have a boy and a girl, so that's always like a fun dynamic. I wish I was hiking a little bit more right now. As I've said, we've moved all over the country, so I've lived in areas that have like world-renowned hiking and amazing foraging, and then areas that are a bit more suburban or just with the climate or the topography, like not really great foraging or hiking. But that's certainly my happy place. So we lived in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. We did a ton of foraging and hiking. And I'm definitely happiest when I have that available, like wild berries. And, hiking is probably my favorite exercise of all time. Like, there's no, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to do this extra amount on the treadmill. Like, now you have to get from point A to point B, and then you have to get back to your car. So good luck, or to your base camp, or whatever you're doing. So certainly still happiest in nature and yeah, finding whatever food grows wild.
I love that. And so that was going to be my question actually on this one. With experience in foraging, and obviously this is not what you're doing on a day-to-day basis to grab your food, but you've got some experience in different climates and that sort of thing. If you had to if you had to subsist specifically on foraging, or let me just say, like on your best foraging day, what percentage of your diet could come from what you foraged versus what you would still have to use as far as like animal foods? Yeah, on like
Oh,
the best foraging landscape you've ever been on.
yeah, calorically probably less than like 5%.
Mm.
Yeah, you cannot, yeah. This is why people get all, idealistic about their food, and like maybe I've kind of the edges have softened a little bit over the years, and especially, you get humbled raising kids and going through picky eating phases. But, like right out of college, I was like, I want to have a huge garden and grow as much food as I can for myself. And you realize after just one growing season how literally impossible that is. I mean, I know some people make it work with the homesteading. There's also a lot of people coming off of the post-COVID homesteading scene who are completely burnt out and like, this is not really sustainable. And some of my like most favorite homesteader foragers, like Tara of Slow Down Farmstead, who I am lucky to know personally, like they work so hard to grow their food. It's amazing, and I aspire one day to grow or raise even more of it. But yeah, foraging wise, best days would be wild berries like wild blackberries or huckleberries, blueberries. In Alaska, we had wild cranberries, also known as lingonberries. Yeah, maybe 5% of the diet.
Yeah, tiny. Yeah.
Um, yeah, you also realize, especially when you live in climates that at higher latitudes, like further from the equator, you can very clearly understand why traditionally those cultures needed to on such a high proportion of their diet coming from animal foods because the winter is long. They're like the only berries that you're going to be eating is what you've preserved. And you know how the Aleutic people preserved their wild cranberries, which by the way are not even sweet. They'd preserve them in seal oil, right? So you're getting like this
Oh, wow.
teeny tiny amount of carbohydrate and like a ton of fat from what you've hunted. So yeah, the foraging part is like a small, small
Yeah.
proportion of the diet. Maybe if you came across some wild tubers or something, and certainly if you were in the tropics and you had like larger and more prolific fruit, maybe that would be a larger proportion of the diet, but certainly not in the north.
I really appreciate that. And just to make the point that, like, I think when people say hunter gatherers, they make it like a 50-50 split. And most people don't realize, like, I mean, I'm kind of like you. I like to be outside. I like to be, hiking and in the mountains that are very accessible to me. And like, I'm either an idiot and just really untrained, and maybe I'm just walking over tubers all over the place and I just don't recognize that they're underneath my feet, or there just is not that much food that's given to us that we can access, especially when we consider it all year. I mean, I remember a camping trip I did 2 years ago where a family of three was picking wild berries and they were tiny, like you were saying, and they worked on this bush for like an hour and a half. And I saw them as I was just kind of hanging out, and they walked away with like maybe like a tiny Ziploc bag filled with
Oh
berries.
yeah,
It was kind of a lot of work. And right next to it was a lake. And there was this older couple just sitting there in chairs and casting, for fish. And they were catching so many fish doing like no work. If you had to
yeah,
live on either one of those two and you're thinking about how much energy you're expending and what you're getting back, it would be no contest. So I think it's cool that we
absolutely.
can find amazing food out there. It gives us variety. It is seasonal, but at the same time, to think that like hunting and gathering being a 50-50 split is probably not very plausible.
I completely agree. Especially like I grew up in Southern California, so hiking those mountains, which is just, they're really quite barren. There's not a whole lot really that you can forage. Like the native people were probably doing a lot of trapping and a lot of hunting
Yeah.
because the mountains dry out and like desiccate into a tinderbox every summer. I mean, there's not much left that's green. You can
Yeah.
harvest some sagebrush, but you're not really going to be eating a whole lot of sage, right?
Hope
Yeah.
not. Well, thank you for addressing that. I think that's really important since you had that experience. Number 7 on our list, I taught Pilates for many years. And although I've shifted my career back to nutrition, I still practice Pilates regularly. My former nickname and the name of my first blog was Pilates Nutritionist. We love Pilates around here. My wife is comprehensive certified. We've got a reformer 2 stories below where I'm sitting right now. Is Pilates still something you do, or have you shifted the way you think about your exercise routine? I know you said you love to hike and be outside. Are you still doing Pilates, or is there anything that you like doing better these days?
I still like Pilates. I probably don't do as much of it as I should. I've got two Wunda chairs right over here in the corner of my office, actually. But yeah, I think what I love about Pilates is the focus on like really precise engagement of different muscle groups and the breath and working like the teeny tiny stabilizing muscles. I find very helpful. I'm a bit more on the hypermobile side, so like I could do all the crazy stuff in a yoga class, but I'm probably going to hurt myself too. So Pilates was really, really good for strength and posture. I do nowadays incorporate more weightlifting. Again, I should be doing more than I am, but I know how important it is, especially as you get older, for maintaining lean body mass and metabolic health. Cardio wise, hiking is still my favorite, but when not hiking, I can always do like walking or biking with the kids or other things. But I tend to focus a bit more on the strength side of things. And I think I threw in that little like line on that thing in particular about the former name of my blog because I had so many articles already on my website, all with like customized images that I was like, there's no chance I'm going to go through all of this and rebrand everything and re-upload everything. So I'm just going to say it here so people
Smart.
know and aren't like, what the heck is Pilates nutritionist? But yeah, that was another era. It was fun,
Yeah.
but I realized early on, like, I don't really want to make my writing all about movement, and I want to focus more on the nutrition thing. So I decided to eventually ditch the Pilates naming.
Yeah, gotcha. You mentioned the Wonder Chair. We have one of those as well. I think I used one for the first time and the last time about 9 years ago, and I think I'm still sore from using it. It's pretty real.
That thing is, yeah, that thing is brutal. The electric chair is even worse if you ever go to a studio that has one of those. It's like terrible and awesome at the same time. Like, wow, that gets muscles you didn't even know existed.
It's amazing. I've never heard of that. I'm just trying to picture what it might be, but yeah, that sounds
It's as
hellish for
bad
sure.
and painful as it sounds. Yeah.
Have you found a decent amount of strength training, like in a week? Have you found like a decent amount that you try to target to hit? And within that question is like, are you surprised by how little like actual time you need to do really, really, really good strength training? Like you would think like people that are strength training are in the gym, 6, 7 days a week and they're there for like an hour. What have you learned about your own personal strength training? And are you surprised that you can be very effective with a lot less time?
Honestly, my sessions are usually like about 15 minutes. So yeah, I try to do it like 3, 4 days a week. Again, I could probably be doing more. Um, but I figure a little bit is better than nothing. And over the years also, again, I'm not like really not very good at weightlifting. It's something I have to like force myself to do, but I've found that if I go just a little bit heavier, but for a little bit less time, unless I'm trying to work on some sort of like postural thing. But that's where Pilates comes in, right? You're mostly using your own body weight's resistance or, whatever resistance of the contraption you happen to be on. But I go just a little bit heavier than is comfortable and for less time. And I think the results are honestly quite good. What I like about weightlifting is it doesn't stimulate your appetite so much. I think like aerobics just tanks my blood sugar so much that it makes me really hungry. And then I've probably just like, it's almost like over stresses the system, which is why I like my aerobics to be built into the everyday life or something like hiking versus like forcing a super long run. It's just for my body type. It doesn't feel great. My husband loves running and he does fine with it. Appetite is crazy on days he runs, but he loves running. And I've just found that yeah, my sweet spot's kind of somewhere with the Pilates and the weightlifting.
Cool. Yeah, I love that. I wish more people would know that 15 minutes of very effective strength training work, like that could be your entire strength training program for the week. So I think that's fantastic. Number 8 on the list, I'm averse to following recipes, but I will force myself to do it if I'm developing recipes for my blog, course, or books. It's for the greater good. My ebook features 30 recipes, perfect for preconception, pregnancy, and postpartum recovery. I'm not a huge recipe person as well. Obviously, you kind of have to do it when you're first getting into this and you want to make food that tastes good. Maybe 3 standout recipes that you feel like you've created that have gotten really, really good feedback.
Let's see. The hidden liver meatloaf, I think it's just called grass-fed beef meatloaf and real food for pregnancy gets a lot of rave reviews. It's still a favorite in my house, actually. My son just asked for it the other night. Um, I have curry recipes in real food for pregnancy, and there's also one in real food for fertility. Those get pretty good reviews. The one in real food for pregnancy is a chicken curry. The one in Real Food for Fertility is a green curry with cod. I was trying to incorporate a few more seafood recipes. And that was one that I think fish in a curry people don't think about, but it's really good. And the fish just cooks
Interesting.
right in the curry. That's a pretty popular one. The spinach quiche, and that one I think is in Real Food for Pregnancy, might also be in the Gestational Diabetes book. I try to like reduce the number of overlaps in recipes, but some are kind of like staples and I have to repeat it. That one gets pretty good reviews. And I mean, I know people get all weird about spinach these days with the oxalates or whatever, but you're getting like really great source of folate. You're incorporating like 10 ounces of spinach into this quiche, but it's still super delicious. It's just a real nutrient powerhouse. So those would be probably some of the top ones. I could probably choose more, but yeah, I'll write down recipes like as I'm cooking if I know it is helpful to share. But for the most part, I am really a fly by the seat of my pants kind of a cook. And I think the thing that a lot of people maybe make the mistake of when they're cooking that makes things not taste good, and this also might be some of the reason that people like my recipes, by the way, is they don't use enough salt. So I specify the amount of salt in all of my recipes because home cooks always undersalt. And if you undersalt something, it'll taste terrible. So not salting things enough and also like overcrowding the pan so things don't get a nice sear or some browning on them, that really affects the flavor. So for the most part, I'm making up stuff in my own kitchen. Like it's hard for me to repeat the same thing twice, but if I'm developing a recipe, I'll make it a few times. I'll write down measurements. I'll actually measure my spices instead of, freewheeling it, because I do know people enjoy being able to recreate it at home.
Yeah, got it. One of my friends, Brad Bache, just did this on his really popular YouTube channel. He's known as the Butchered Wizard, and he's been playing around with the carnivore diet. He just came up with a book called Primal Cuts, which is all about breaking down the big cuts of meat you can buy at the grocery store and save tons of money by chopping up your own roasts and steaks and that kind of thing. And he did a video which I thought was fascinating, where he was taking burger patties and mixing them with different ratios of liver and taste testing each of them. 1 pound of ground beef to 1 ounce, and then 2 ounces, and then 3 ounces, and 4 ounces. By the time he was at 4 ounces, it's like, wow, this got a really liver kind of punch to it. So when you're making the meatloaf, what kind of ratio do you tend to be around? Is that something you pay attention to?
So probably at most like 3 ounces of liver per pound of beef. Um, I think for people who are new to it, I'd start out at an ounce. Um, and if you're especially new to it, and this is actually the way that I prefer to do it, I like to actually just make a big batch of pate and then freeze it in small portions and then defrost like a cube of pate like the night before I'm going to make meatloaf and then mix that in. And the
Yeah.
benefit with that is you're getting like you've already seasoned the pate to taste really good. So you don't have to like make up for the spice ratios when you're preparing the meatloaf. Like the liver already tastes good. And then you're just seasoning the beef of the meatloaf. So that's my preference for doing it. And it's also just,
Smart.
it's an efficiency thing in the kitchen. I'm just really big on efficiency. I hate wasting my time. So, having to like get, 3 ounces of liver, like you can't like buy 3 ounces of liver at the grocery store. And then you need to like grind it up. Like I may as well just make pate, freeze it, have it ready to go and do it that way. Of course, nowadays, this didn't exist when Real Food for Pregnancy came out, but there are now brands that'll mix in organ meats into the grind already. And some, if you do like a cow share and maybe the processor is open to it, sometimes you can get them to do an organ grind with your ground meat. That's great. That makes things like way easier. But I've always done the pate hack over the years.
That's a great hack. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really easy way to approach it. Yeah, so that's great. 9 and 10 are a little bit related, and I think they're both really interesting. So, number nine first, reading research studies is one of my favorite pastimes. I read 10 to 20 most weeks. Um, I I would not blame you at all if you're not reading 10 to 20 studies a week. I'm always stunned how often I get the alert from Google Scholar, which will send me a list of new studies that just mention the name like ketogenic, and like every week there's like lists and lists and lists of so many different studies. Are you still keeping up with the latest science, or do you feel like we're in a pretty good place to be able to kind of speak to some of these things without having to really stay on top of the latest studies that are always coming out?
Yeah, I'm probably more at like 5 to 10 a week, if I'm being honest, for current use. If I'm in the middle of writing a book, I may be reading 50 or more studies a week. I mean, it really will shift based on the season I'm in. But as for like, do I think there's going to be like groundbreaking things that completely change my entire approach to nutrition? I haven't seen anything that has really been like, wow, I'm gonna completely overhaul my approach, or everything I wrote in that book is completely wrong. Like maybe there's some little minor differences, like for quantities of nutrients. We've had, I mean, right up until like the month before Real Food for Pregnancy went to print, like a groundbreaking study on choline and pregnancy came out. And I like snuck it in the final edit. Like it was already in formatting. And I was like, I have to add this sentence and this citation on this study, right? That was, 2018. And there hasn't been a research study since then that's been quite as groundbreaking. We have a follow-up study that's now followed these children who were exposed to high choline intake in utero, and the data has been published up to age 7 of those children, like reinforcing the findings of how important it is. But it actually doesn't change my recommendations, right? So I follow it, and I write research briefs on my Instagram, highlighting some interesting finding of a study, but a lot of it is just like, this is a fascinating tidbit and piece of data. It's not something that totally changes my approach. And I don't know if you feel the same, but I kind of feel like we're at a pretty good place with nutrition science. And I think, if anything, it's like, I think what's kind of missing on the clinical end is that people get so into their dogma that they can't see when you need to make shifts for one client or another client in a different direction. Like there's absolutely, great reasons to use a ketogenic diet, and then you're going to have a client where that's not the right intervention. And it's up to like what we need to be working on, in my opinion, is like helping clinicians get better clinical judgment so they can choose the right intervention for the client in front of them versus getting like more and more down in our dogma,
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think this is where your position in the space is so interesting, because you started to get here by looking backwards to our past, and we see how, traditional, cultures lived, and we know that they were healthy, and now, they couldn't explain the science, but now there's scientific papers that are coming out, and it's more just confirming what we already knew, about these cultures. And so, yeah, it's less that I think a new study is going to come out and disprove everything. It just seems like the more and more they pile up, they more, work with each other and speak with each other just to make that a little bit more clear. So I love that. And now we are down to our final one, which is number 10. Putting research into context is my jam. Questions always on the top of my mind are: why did the author study this in the way they did? How was it studied? Who funded it? Are the results applicable to real life? If so, how? Do the findings make sense in the context of ancestral nutrition? And are the conclusions supported by the data in the study? I'll just stop right there before I bore you to tears. So it's really funny. What have you learned? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm impressed we got to number 10, and I'm like, well, I don't really disagree with anything that's on there. So good. Maybe I don't need to obsessively, go edit my about page now. Let me know what your follow-up question was, though.
The follow-up question is just like, as you've done this for so long, what have you learned about the nature of nutrition science, the studies that come out? Is the word nutrition science even something that is like achievable? What have you noticed as far as who is doing the studies? What are they saying? Like, yeah, just with all your experience and everything you've read, why do you have to kind of do your research with those things in mind?
Yeah. So I think what I've learned over the years is to be a really critical reader of research papers. I think when you're like new to reading research, you're a bit naive, you're maybe like in college and you just want to like cite a paper and have like a good quote from a paper. You're just kind of like, you skim the abstract, you look at the results and conclusion. And I remember having professors saying like the meatiest part of the paper is the methods. You really need to focus on the methods. And coming full circle, she was right. But moreover, sometimes like the overarching bias or agenda or whatever that's influencing research, like how researchers write about their results, sometimes you'll have like papers where the title of the paper, the abstract of the paper, and even sometimes sections of their results and conclusions don't accurately reflect the data from the study. This was something that really was like top of mind for Lisa and I when we were working on Real Food for Fertility. I mean, part of the reason that we wanted to co-author the book is we each have different areas of expertise, like mine being in nutrition, hers being in the menstrual cycle, fertility awareness, helping clients with charting and all of that. And so the things that we would pick up on as limitations in the methods of papers were different. And so we'd often have like little powwows about like, hey, she's writing the sperm quality chapter and hey, here's a study on meat. They're saying this, but when I'm looking at the data table, like, what am I missing? And it's like, well, the data table's accurate, but they're not writing about it correctly. So this is especially prevalent with the writing on meat. And there has been, I don't know if you want to call it a conspiracy or whatever, but there's been this whole like agenda pushing plant-based eating, and eating meat is bad for you or bad for the planet or whatever. Like eat less meat is the overarching, you know, message that people have gotten. And I feel like this is shifting a little bit in the past couple of years, but nonetheless, a lot of the papers on, say, meat and fertility, they may write, and we even included a section in the vegetarian chapter on like, but I heard meat is bad for fertility, like going through some of these specific studies, because some of them will say, even the title of the study is implying that meat, or red meat in particular, is bad for you and plant-based proteins are better for your fertility. And you go and read their actual data tables, if it's a study willing to even publish the data, which I kind of don't trust studies that don't put their actual data tables in them. But I saw from the study, like red meat was net neutral. And some of the plant-based proteins were actually scored the worst, like they were the most harmful to ovulatory function. And yet their paper title was saying plant proteins are good for fertility. Like, what in the world? Like, so I think if anything, it's like I've become a very critical reader of papers. I'm the first to be thinking of the limitations of the findings. And I think we need to also have a bit of like contextual common sense when we're reading research papers. Like academia and real life clinical practice are like very different things. So it's been interesting to be somebody who kind of like straddles the two, because at the end of the day, if you're working with a fertility client or a pregnant client and you're looking at their dietary intake of somebody who's not eating meat, for example, their protein intake is often not enough, or the amino acid balance is incomplete and insufficient. Their micronutrient intake is too low. Like all these things are a problem. And your paper is telling me that plant protein is better. And then like, what are the outcomes in real life clinical practice? Well, for me, when I worked with clients with gestational diabetes, blood sugar is an absolute nightmare to try to get under control when somebody is not eating any animal protein. And likewise with fertility, like the cycle is so often completely fucked up, excuse my French, when they're not eating enough animal protein. And it's not just the protein, it's all the other stuff that's in those foods. So like, tell me again how that's really beneficial. Like sometimes we need to have a bit of common sense and like real world clinical experience to put findings, in their place, or, see whether a paper even has applicability to our practice or not, you know?
No, that's a great answer. I mean, one that came out like a year or two ago, I remember the CNN, headline, red meat is bad for you, and the pictures of a bunch of steaks. And then you read down, you click, click, click. It's several clicks to even get the link to the actual study. And red meat in this study was defined as, I want to say, bologna, hot dogs, and bacon. That was red meat in this
Right.
study. And it's like, really, like, that's what we're talking about. Yet you put steak
Yep.
as the picture on the thing, and that's the headline and all that stuff. So, really, really tricky, really important to read into some of these things. Lily, we made it all 10 of
I
the fun
know.
facts about you. That was way fun. Really,
That
really
was
enjoyed that.
fun. Yeah, that was a new one, and I'm glad I don't need to immediately go and edit things on my website. I probably should edit the number of podcasts. We'll have to run a report and see
There
how
you go.
many I've been on and update that. But yeah, that was fun and
It's like a
funny.
resume. You don't need to overhaul it. You just need to dust it off from time to time.
That's right. That's right.
Uh, well, that's great. Well, we really appreciate that. I really appreciate you and your work. I told you last time, I'll tell you this time. You're somebody I followed for a really, really long time in this space. You consider things that are nuanced, and you're not so black and white. You write about things in a great style. I love the book Real Food for Fertility, the last one you wrote, which is sitting next to me. I really, really love it. So you do amazing work, and I know you're super busy. So thank you so very much for being on our show today. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with your work? And if there's anything new, or maybe a book you've got coming out, or a program, or anything going on, you can share where people can go and find that as well.
Sure. Yeah, so you can find me on my website, lilynicholsrdn.com. That's the main hub. There's separate websites for the books and the programs and the whatever, but it's all linked out from that hub. If you're new to my writing, my blog is up there. There's hundreds of articles. There is still no paywall on my blog. I'm still not over on Substack or whatever. So use the search bar and search for whatever interests you. My books are linked out from there as well. And then as for things I'm working on, I really put a lot of my energy these days into training practitioners. You could probably hear as I'm talking, like so many things take clinical judgment and kind of like weighing like, well, what is the right intervention for this person? So while I can help a lot of people with my books, and I've certainly done as much as I can for, educating the general masses, so to speak, I really do love having that like high touch one-on-one or group mentorship with people, which I do now through the Institute for Prenatal Nutrition. So our 2026 class is just finishing up enrollment right now. I have no idea when this episode will come out, if there'll still be any seats, but nonetheless, that's a really fun place for me to put my energy these days. No plans currently in the works for another book. I did come out for an ebook on twin pregnancy nutrition that's over on my shop if somebody happens to be pregnant with twins. But I don't know if another book will ever be on the table. Lisa and I joke like we almost have like post-traumatic book disorder or something. Like it's so much work. Well, I mean, you could see, which is just like the thickness of the book. I don't write any of my books with AI or anything. We're in a weird place where like half the stuff on Amazon is just AI slop these days. When you really like take the time to write a good book and you put the effort in to edit it, and especially when you have to cite like every other sentence or almost every sentence, it takes a lot of time. And I don't know if I have it in me to do another book, but we'll see.
Don't blame you.
We'll see. You'll hear about it if another one ever comes about. Maybe when my kids are a little bit older.
Well, I don't blame you at all. And again, just holding this thing, like this is quite thick. And it's kind of small print. And you know what? There's not even like pictures or anything in there. It's all words. So that is a
Yeah,
tremendous amount of work.
we had to edit it in a way that like kept the page count in check because at our first formatting it was over 700 pages and
Wow.
we didn't even have the references in. We decided just to put in a select list of some highlighted references for each chapter, and we have the reference list as a downloadable 200-page PDF
Oh my gosh.
because you don't want people walking around. Nobody wants to carry a 700-page book onto an airplane, you know? So we're like, whoa, we got to get this under control. So yeah, you can imagine it's just kind of a lot. Maybe if I write another book, it won't be quite so
Yeah.
long. We're pretty
Wow.
cutthroat with editing too. We try not to be overly wordy, but it just adds up, with fertility being a reflection of your overall health. It's like you kind of have to touch on almost everything
Yeah, for
in
sure.
order to, do the topic justice. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a bit
Well,
tricky.
on behalf of all the trees out there that you've saved, thank you very much for doing that with your reference. Uh, well, and we'll be grateful for any work that you've already put out, and there's a lot there. So, Lily, always great to chat with you. Thank you so very much for taking the time to be on our show today. We really, really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.